Okay, so, the latest season of Invincible has now concluded. I've just seen the final episode, and well, now I'm here asking myself if it was worth the wait for the third season of... Okay, so, Season 3. I have some thoughts and opinions with just how this season has gone. Of course, I know there was a long wait for this season to release. Animation is difficult and takes a lot of time and money to produce. So to be more objective and kinder with any of my criticisms, I'm going to go over each episode released for the season. I'll talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I think didn't work as well. Also, when I can, I'll chip in with how I think some of these episodes could have been made even better. Also, just lastly before we get started, I also want to say that this video will largely be spoiler free, but in the event that I have to talk about something, I will, so don't be all too alerted about spoilers because I will really try and keep them to a minimum wherever I can. Oh, and lastly, before I get started, I'm just going to say that I haven't read the original comic. Currently, I'm spending all of my time on Global Comics reading the Creepshow books. Okay, so, episode 1. Mark is back, and well, the episode is just kind of alright. Don't get me wrong, it was good, and I enjoyed it. But I do think that it has just a little bit of a problem standing out amongst the other episodes of the season, considering what happens in the next episode immediately following this one. Seriously, this episode does a great job of setting up the next episode and that story. However, I do think that it's just a little weird when you remember that it was Dr. Seismic that was the inciting event for that story. That is, if you even do remember Dr. Seismic, which is where I think the problem lies, because despite the voice actor Chris, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that, does do a fantastic job giving the dude a seriously funny voice, I do still think that the character just doesn't get a moment to stand out. It was nice to see Rick and William again, Oliver's enthusiasm to be a hero was fun, and Sandra Oh is still doing a great job as Debbie. Lastly, the multipole fight was so good, and Jason, oh god,
Mantzoukas
is still, of course, doing a great job as Rexplode. Also, before we move on to the next episode, you might want to get comfortable with me complaining that the villains don't get enough time to actually be properly developed or explored in this show. Episode 2. Okay, so shit gets real, and I'm here for it. Now, I don't want to get into the whole argument of who's right in this situation, but what I do want to say is that I do think the whole conflict has been put together very well from a writing standpoint. The fact that the showrunners are now adding more to Cecil's character really helps with the standpoint Cecil's character takes and the decisions he makes. Also, it probably shouldn't have to be said, but Cecil's voice actor, Walton Goggins' voice is just popping off in this role. His performance perfectly sells that disassociated but still caring and concerned tone that I think a character like this would have. Like I said earlier, this episode also sees the beginning of a great and interesting conflict between Cecil and Mark. The fight then also spreading out to involve the Guardians of the Globe was also pretty fun and interesting. I mean, we started to see the beginning of that rift with the Guardians in the last episode when the Immortal and Duplicate returned, but here we really see it developed even further. Also, I've never really been one for Mark and Eve's romance. However, I do like to see that we get to see more of it here, and we get to see just how the two characters approach the subject and how it might develop in the future. Debbie herself also got a bit of a romance plot, and I think it was fine. The episode's last flashback with Cecil and Omni-Man was also pretty interesting, and I mean, I'll take any opportunity to hear J.K. Simmons' fantastic voice. Oliver wanted a real suit, and he got one, eventually. the design just needed a few revisions. Because of course, the whole Omni-Man brand doesn't have that great of an image, unfortunately, at the moment, which made it slightly alerting when Oliver chose to run with that image for at least a little while. Thankfully, however, we did get to see Mark and Debbie face that whole issue together in an empathetic and sincere way. We also got to see Titan return this episode. He doesn't get much time to shine, but still, he does manage to make the best of what time he does get. Kind of like Eve. I like the scene with her and her parents, and have been enjoying her time with Mark. Despite all this, however, the episode does kind of lack a sense of luster. This episode, again, is one that does a lot to set up future episodes, but still, I do think that there is a cost to that in this episode, largely with the fact that there doesn't feel like there's all that much going on this episode, and subsequently probably won't be an episode I want to return to all that often. I'm just saying that I can see the value in this episode, but really aren't sure as to whether or not the cost was worth it. But as a whole, this episode was just kind of okay, and honestly, I'm ready to move on to the next episode. It's episode 6. We've got one hell of a sick punch and some time travel. Now, if you've seen the episode, you of course know what I'm talking about. So, to start off with, we've got Rex and Amanda out there together. And honestly, I'm really enjoying both characters so far this season. I mean, sure, I can see Rex writing his obituary in the background of every scene, but still, I'm enjoying these characters together so far. Moving on a little, we also get to see the return of the two brothers who stole the Declaration of Independence, and it's from there that we get to travel into the future and see that the Immortal is now King of the Earth, because Mark just cannot catch a break apparently. Yeah, I mean, the poor guy just has it real tough this episode, and what with him having to do another murder, yeah, he doesn't have the best of time. But also, aside from Mark's deteriorating mental health, we also have another battle beast, Alan and Omni-Man episode. And finally, the two of them have escaped. And yeah, this was a fun, action-focused half episode. Now, something I just want to touch on is the animation. Here, the animation was of course phenomenal, with it being clear that it had a lot of time and effort put into it. However, there have been some instances in the previous episodes where it has been a little clear that the budget for the animation has been preserved for the later fight scenes and other episodes. Now, I'm not complaining about this. In fact, I know that this is actually pretty standard for the animation industry. Heck, sometimes animation budgets shrink with every new season. So yeah, it was around the release of this episode of the show that I started to see some people complain about some small parts of different episodes, where some people thought that the animation was lacking, and to those people I just wanted to say that this is, yeah, it's not great, but it's still kind of the best someone can hope for, with the executives deciding to be fair and increase the production budgets instead of just giving themselves a pay rise for their growing yacht collections. So yeah, some lackluster animation is the money guy's fault, not the artists. And I'm sure that more of the animation budget is being saved for later fight scenes that come with the future episodes of the season. Episode 4 was a fun and enjoyable time. I mean, we got 2 half episodes which were fair enough, pretty much the best that they could do with these half episodes, I think, just with the types of stories that they had going on at the time. But still, I think that I'd rather prefer a full-length episode to more half episodes in the future. So, I mean, I'm not going to be too mean or too critical, but I am just going to say that these 2 half episodes were fine, and I can see why they condensed both of these into 2 half episodes, but I don't think this episode as a whole will be one that many people come back to often, except for maybe the Omni-Man and Alan fight later on, and the Invincible and the immortal fight. It's a good couple stories for the characters, but there's just something that I don't think is punching hard enough to really make these episodes a good on a rewatch, if that makes any sense. Honestly, the first half episode is really good, but I only think that it's as good as it is just because of Mark and Eve's chemistry in the beginning, and then how the two complement each other once Mark's return from the future, and the two actually get to talk with one another and resolve some issues, which is mostly more of Mark's problems than Eve's problems, but still, it's good actually seeing them two together in a way that I actually believe. A lot of the Mark and Eve stuff so far has been kind of concerning, but this was actually pretty fun and enjoyable, and I actually liked it. Also, watching Mark be forced to deal with some of the consequences of some of his actions, but then also having to deteriorate his mental health and be forced to kill was also pretty fun and interesting. But again, with it just being a half episode, I don't think that there was enough time given to this subject, where it seemed to be a pretty big thing for Mark, but in the episode, it just doesn't feel like there's enough time devoted to that. So, which might make it easier for Mark and Eve when they're talking about it towards the end of the episode, but still, there's some sort of trade-off there, and I think for many people it'll work for them, and for others it might not, but still. Anyway, this episode was an actually good episode. It had some good action in it, and it had some fun character stuff in it. So yeah, time for the next episode. Okay, I don't know much about this multipole guy, but still, I do know that the guy's got some serious self-worth issues. Honestly, I think that this has to be one of my favourite episodes of the season so far. Yeah, it's not all that deep with its writing, but it's got Titan and Mark and Eve fighting a dragon. Also, if that wasn't enough, the episode's also got Machine Head in it with his funny auto-tuned voice. Trust me, I know there are other episodes out there in the season that are technically doing more of the writing, but still, I do just enjoy this episode a lot because I think it's fun and kinda simple. I mean, I could watch this episode on its own and not feel like I'm missing out on anything, which isn't something that I think I can do with a lot of the previous episodes. Also, in this episode, we got to see Oliver teach some bullies a lesson, and thankfully he managed to do that without ripping their hearts out of their chests. Which, yeah, I'm just going to expand on this rather quickly because I don't think it's all that much of a big deal right now, just given what we've seen with it. But Oliver killing the Blues Brothers initially was kind of a shocking thing. Not so much if you keep in mind the whole Omni-Man branding moment, but still, him killing them was definitely a big moment for Mark. But seeing him and Eve see that Oliver can be more than just the type of Omni-Man wannabe superhero was a really nice thing. Just seeing how he can relate to normal people whilst also being the type of strong superhero who is really definitely quite conflicted about just how much force is required for some situations and how much alike he is to his father. It's all really interesting, but I definitely feel like we got to see Mark's reaction to all of it here in a rather good way, what with Eve being there to really trust Oliver and then teach Mark to trust Oliver just a bit more. So that was all really good stuff, and following that we then got to see Mark tell Debbie of just how Oliver's doing and where he's going and what he's doing, And I like seeing that Oliver is really not only developing as a character, but developing as a member of the family, especially considering just how quickly he grows in comparison to a human being, and how him being Omni-Man's other son has affected not only Mark, but also Debbie and the rest of the family. And I like how, despite how or who Oliver is, or where he came from, that Debbie and Mark still choose to embrace him as best they can. They try to teach him as best they can. They try to do everything for him, and I really like seeing that dynamic. And it does sometimes have me on edge with just how forceful Oliver would want to be, and just how desperate he is to be a superhero. Not because I think him being a superhero would be a bad idea. It's largely just because of the fact that I think that him wanting to be an Omni-Man type superhero would definitely be a problem. But still, I think that if things continue with Debbie and Mark and Eve trusting Oliver, that we might actually be able to see Oliver come out the other side of everything more of a Mark-like Invincible than a Omni-Man. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops over the next few episodes. Lastly, there's just a couple more things I want to touch on. The first being Titan. In this episode, we get to see him really come back, and him having made a deal with Machine Head was really quite interesting, and I like how it resolves his place in the crime syndicate, and how it gives him basically what he wants, but still leaves room in there for Machine Head to be a dick and just renege on the deal that's been made. So seeing Titan get really what he's fought for and now deserves, and seeing him actually have a good influence on the world around him, is something that I've enjoyed, and something that I hope we can see develop with, in terms of just him and Mark maybe working together a bit more in the future, as Mark has definitely learnt now that Titan is still a criminal, but someone that he can work with to not only his advantage, but the rest of the city's advantage. It's always a complex thing there when you have these types of different character who operate in different worlds, but still want different outcomes that are generally better for everybody, but still empower certain others. So that would be interesting to see develop over the future. The final thing I want to touch on before moving on to the next episode is just the idea of Mark and Eve working as like security contractors for this prison was a really fun idea to me. I don't know why, but it's just really funny thinking that someone like Multipole could break out of prison only to be captured by Mark again at the doors. That was something funny to me. I also like the idea of just seeing the warden not go through real security contractors and instead have to go through Mark and Eve, which was quite funny. But yeah, I mean, what else could you do working as a superhero? It would be... I mean, Superman works as a reporter. I mean, and Mark works as a jail guard. It's funny to me. I like it. Anyway, moving on. Okay, this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but seriously, I'm just going to come out and say it. I didn't care for Powerplex. Seriously, that dude barbecued his own family and I laughed out loud. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so in this episode, we see that the city is going to hold a vigil for the victims lost in the crossfire of Mark's and Omni-Man's fight. And yes, I probably am being charitable when I call it a fight. Honestly, it was probably more relatable to a pummeling, where Mark comes out the other end with moments to live, and Omni-Man comes out the other end with a new fascination for bugs. But still, I'm getting distracted. Back on topic. This episode is just kind of fine. I mean, I really like the idea. The execution of that idea, however, is what annoys me. Powerplex as a character could have been really interesting. But seriously, from the first few moments of the episode, you can just guess what's going to happen. And that's just kind of disappointing, because you can see and hear Aaron Paul giving his all to the episode. The main problem with it is that he's only just got the one episode to do it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to the show trying to do some sort of story like this. I just feel as if this story could have been built up a bit more, with Scott maybe appearing in a previous episode. Hell, even in this episode, they try to show that Scott has been trying for a while to do something that could give him justice. It's just that everything Scott is trying to do is confined to this episode. Also, everything being confined to this episode made it so that I just kinda didn't care about Scott's fall. I mean, the guy goes from trying to get Invincible in court to tying up his own son and wife in the same episode, which is another thing I didn't like, because seriously, in the last half of the episode, it feels like you're just seeing Scott give up on his revenge every 2 minutes, only to be talked back into it, and talked into not giving up by his wife. And I mean, this happened all so quickly that it's probably the reason why I laughed when Powerplex barbecued his wife and son to death. Like, seriously, the episode just low-key turned Scott's wife into a tool to keep the plot going, and in the end, it threw her and her son away when it didn't need them anymore. And I mean, what I'm trying to say is, like, the wife and the son in this episode, they have no character. But yet they're still one of the biggest driving forces, telling Scott to go out there and continue to fight Invincible and Mark, even though Scott tries to give up several times. So it's kind of like karmic justice in a little bit of a way. Like, why? like the wife is there in the end, and she's cradling her son. She can see that Scott has no chance of actually defeating Mark, but still she chooses to spit in Mark's face and be around the person who's about to barbecue her and her son to death. And, like, they show that this character is just completely devoted to this idea of getting revenge on Mark, because apparently this woman had some connection to Scott's sister. And, like, the only bit of, like, evidence we get for this is just one line at some point, and when we first see her in the episode, where she just states that she really liked Scott's sister as well, and that she wants revenge. And it's just like, okay, but still, why are you being promoted as the main driving force, even though the writers are just planning on killing you? And I have no problem with the wife being a big character. I just wish that they had written the wife more as a human being, because the way she's written in the episode, you can't really see any humanity in her, because all she's doing is driving the plot forward without actually showing what type of a person she is, why she really liked Scott's sister, how devoted she is to actually getting her revenge on Mark, and just how much she loves her son, because in the end, it's her that pushes Scott to this final confrontation. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was her who came up with the main idea, or for the plan, to lure Mark in. So, when they both get barbecued, and Powerplex is left in tears, and everything else just happens, the story gets everything it wants out of these two characters, and it throws them away, and it feels like I'm expected to just connect with Scott in this moment. It's pulling a, oh no, what has he done? And I knew what he was doing. I knew what he was going to do. I knew what he was going to do from the very moment I first saw him. And I would have thought that, okay, yeah, they're probably going to do this with these characters, but maybe I'll feel something. But when it got to that point where they were barbecued, I didn't feel anything. Instead, I laughed because the wife had been shown to be such an inhuman character. She was more of just... I didn't really see her as a human being. I saw her as an engine driving the story forward. And again, I'm just going to say that I have nothing against the idea of what they were going for with this episode. I just wish that they had written it in such a way that I would have thought it would be more believable. Also, the rest of this episode is just kind of fine. I mean, it's not something that I'm sure I'll return to all that often, but in the universe of the story, I feel like it's a good idea to show something like this, especially for Mark, and for, in sort of the same way, for Oliver as well, because of course he has still got the whole Omni-Man thing going on, and seeing these two relate to this whole vigil and all of the destruction, which was largely caused by their father, is something that I thought was good to see, especially for Oliver. However, I do definitely think that Mark could have said something to him in this moment to properly define why it was such a massive tragedy, because in this episode I do think that Oliver kind of gets away with everything, with just being at the vigil but not properly understanding why it was such a big thing to so many people, which was another thing that I thought was interesting to see. Also, in this episode we got to see a bit more of the Guardians. The Martian, Ben Schwartz character, was there. He actually had some funny lines this episode. That's been another thing. Maybe 2 out of 3 lines this Martian dude will say in every other episode are not really that funny, but in this episode he had some actually funny lines for once, to me, and unfortunately we didn't get to see him win that fight, which if you've seen the episode you'll know about, but still, actually seeing Eve come in and really help with the situation initially was quite fun. Also, the title card in this episode was really well placed. I mean, I liked it. And, yeah, hopefully, I know they're hinting at doing more with the Powerplex character, but before we see him next, I hope that the Powerplex character has a moment to really think and realise some like, thought or idea before he sees Mark again, and like, seeing him just become another shouty rage villain isn't something that's all too interesting to me, but again, I could definitely see what they were going for with the character initially. I just hope that they take this opportunity currently to write the character in such a way that he grows a little, and that he's able to learn and show that he can be more of a character, especially considering that the wife and the son are no longer there, so the story and the writers no longer have these artificial tools to just poke the character and get him moving. But yeah, otherwise this episode was just, it was alright. I know I probably feel like I say that about a lot of the episodes, but again, there have been a few bangers previously, and I know some people are going to think that this episode was really good, whilst I only thought it was just okay, but for me, the writing was just kind of obvious in this episode. But yeah, hopefully in the next few episodes, the writing is a little less obvious, and I will probably enjoy them. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so it's time for the Invincible War, and, well, this was a pretty good start. I mean, I haven't read the original comic book, so of course I have no idea what's going on, but still, I did think this was a rather fun and interesting episode. It was definitely a flawed episode though, but still, something that I found rather entertaining and rather fun to watch. Okay, so, the Invincible War. As much as this episode was entertaining and definitely gives you a lot to think about, this episode was also kinda confusing. I mean, don't get me wrong, this episode was full of some great fights and some great action scenes. It was also really interesting to see a lot of the different marks, and it was interesting seeing Angstrom Levy again, but there were just some directing or like writing decisions that I found a little confusing, especially with some of the cuts in this episode. Some of the cuts felt a little out of place and a little strange. I feel like we've just cut between a few different fight scenes at some points, and we also see a variety of different characters that I'm sure would mean something to a lot of comic book readers, but these aren't really characters we have been introduced to in the show. So we have no frame of reference for who they are. And I'm not just talking about the different individual marks, I'm talking about just like the other heroes. And it's strange because this episode definitely wants you to see this conflict as a large war and conflict, and it really wants to build on the conflict between Angstrom Levy and Mark, and just how the world sees him, and that's the big catalyst for the whole conflict and the war. But as the episode goes on, we just see parts and like further pieces of the world with different heroes and everything, and we have no real idea who these people are, how strong they are, how they're defeating these marks, how they're fighting these marks. And that was just something that confused me. Also, just some of the cuts as well were a little out of place and a little strange sometimes. So I definitely feel like those were just a few of my main criticisms that I had with the episode, but they aren't too much of a problem, honestly. Most of them are just pretty nitpicky. As a whole, the episode is still really pretty good and rather entertaining. The episode really does do a lot with the amount of time that it has for this type of story, which I'm sure is something that the books probably give a lot more development and time to, just to further expand on what's going on. So, as much as this episode tries to do its best with that, it does still fall flat in a few places for me, and I would have liked to see a little bit more of time be given to just this story so that we didn't have to have those strange cuts, and that we could have gotten to know some of these other characters. I mean, maybe just like a line or two from Cecil, or like a gathering of these heroes before they have to go out and fight all these marks might have made something a little bit easier to understand. But still, again, I am just kind of being nitpicky with those little critiques. However, I don't feel like I'm being nitpicky when it comes to the ending of the episode and Angstrom Levy's place in it. Because towards the end of the episode, his whole plan relies on trying to throw Mark into another universe, and essentially throwing a load of mechanical camera orbs at him, which they really try to make look cool. They really try to make it look like a great fight scene, and unfortunately for them, it just doesn't work. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure this fight scene could have worked a lot better if the show had been given more time in development and the budget was clearly raised, but the way it is, I just think it left the end of this episode feeling a little lackluster. And also, something that I've been really waiting to critique has to be Angstrom himself and a lot of the other villains in this show. And I'm going to start off with Angstrom just for this episode, because in this episode, he of course is the villain, and he's treated as such, but he doesn't really get enough time to develop his character and convince the audience that he is the main villain. And what I mean by that is that we don't really get to see much of his plan beyond him just wanting to force Mark into another universe after destroying this universe and blaming him for all the destruction. And again, Angstrom has the motivation. He has some character, but I don't feel like we're at a point where we can say that he is a great villain, because we just haven't seen enough of that character be put on screen. And I'm not even sure if he's the same Angstrom that he initially was, because honestly, the catalyst for what I think created Angstrom was that merging of all of the different Angstroms. And this leaves me with a question. The question of, did he hate Mark and Invincible before that merging? Or did his hatred for our Mark only get reinforced and built up after the merging? Because if so, I feel like that creates a different character. And if it does, then I don't think that character has been given anywhere near enough time on screen to actually convince us that he is a good villain. And I'm only saying all of this because I feel like these are just simple problems that can be resolved in the future. And honestly, in this episode, Angstrom tries his best with what he's got, but I just feel like he needs more. And this whole line of thinking with villains not having enough time on screen and not getting enough development is something that I think has run across the entirety of the show, aside from one character, largely because I think that the show is prioritizing the entirety of the Viltrum Empire as the main villain, opposed to these other characters who should be treated more as villains themselves. And it's that constant waiting dread for the next Viltrumite who's going to show up that creates this idea of the Viltrumite Empire being the main villain and antagonistic force. And this, I think, leaves Angstrom and Powerplex and all these other side characters out to dry. And aside from Omni-Man, of course, I feel like this is where the problem begins, because Omni-Man in the first season, he got revealed to be the villain of that season really quite early, which meant that the viewer could have more time to see his character be built up over the entirety of the season, to the point where we could see that he was a character and also a villain, which isn't something that I think we've been able to get with Angstrom Levy and Powerplex and the other villain characters. And honestly, I feel like if we have more time to develop these people as characters, then this problem can be easily resolved. And I only say this because I feel like with Invincible, it's not too difficult to do that, and it would really benefit the show to do that. I just feel like Mark has so much of the screen time with every episode that maybe just pulling back from his screen time a little to give the villains a bit more screen time and a bit more development would really elate this problem that I have and really resolve a lot of the issues that I have with some of the writing for the show. And yeah, I'm just going to move on from that now, because that was my biggest critique of the episode, and honestly, the rest of the episode is pretty great. I mean, we did get to see the world's reaction to all of these different Marks. We did get to see Mark and Oliver go out and fight together and really try and, in the end of the episode, put Mark through this situation of whether or not it's right to kill, just something that's the show's been building to over the season, and all of it was great to watch. It was really entertaining. It was more entertaining for me than the whole Powerplex drama from last episode. And it got to a point where I was actually getting interested in the other marks, and I was really getting interested in how the world is reacting to these marks and where all these other characters are coming from. And that's leaving me with a question of whether or not we're going to see a lot of these other hero characters in the future, or are they just going to be something for this one episode? Which could either be a benefit to the show or the opposite. But again, we'll wait and see on that. And lastly, for this episode, I just want to talk about a few things that I also enjoyed. The first would have to be seeing the Guardians of the Globe really try and stand up for themselves against this mark. And yeah, that was quite interesting. That was a good fight scene. Seeing Darkwing actually do something was quite fun. And seeing the marks go after the different parts of our mark's individual life and then targeting them for the destruction was also quite a interesting thing to do. Whether or not the marks were just doing that themselves or they were doing that for Angstrom though is a question that I have, because Angstrom seems to be more focused on the world's destruction as opposed to just the single part of Mark's life, or the single different parts of Mark's life that he wants to focus on. But yeah, that was also quite good. And of course, we're at the point now where we've got to talk about Rex's death, and that again, man, that was quite something. That was really quite an interesting moment. I don't want to spoil how that moment comes about or what happens, although I'm sure most people have seen it already. And seeing that happen was not the biggest surprise, of course. He's been writing his own obituary in the background of every scene so far, but when it happened, I saw it happen, and I was both kind of entertained, relieved, and just kind of disappointed. I mean, they could have made the visual aspect of it a bit bigger, in my opinion, but beyond that, I'm just going to say that I feel like it was a good, piece of the character. It was a good aspect of his character, and a good moment for him to really see how he goes out the way he does, and with his teammates being there, it was quite something. And honestly, I don't know how it's going to impact Mark in the future, but I'm sure it will. I'm sure we'll see that, but I just don't know how that's going to happen, and that's going to be a question that I'm going to carry into either the next episode or the next season. So yeah, this one was a really quite entertaining episode, and I quite enjoyed it. There were a few problems that I had with it. Some of them were just pretty nitpicky, aside from the whole villain thing, and now, really, I'm just ready for the final episode of the season. Okay, so it's the final episode of the season, and what did I think? Well, it was really, really good. The action was brilliant, and I'm pretty sure that's just the majority of this episode, so I really think that this is where the majority of the show's budget also went, and honestly, I enjoyed it as much as I could, visually. And honestly, watching the episode, I did have a few nitpicks, but honestly, they weren't anything too big. Just to get my main criticism out of the way, I'm just going to say that with what I said last week about the whole villain thing with the Viltrumite Empire being the main villain and the catalyst for why a lot of other villains don't get a lot of screen time and development, I feel like that holds strong here. Here we get another Viltrumite character, and he is the Dreaded. The whole writing thing of the Dreaded, he comes in, he proves that point here, and he is the big bad. And he's a really good big bad, but also a really kind of uninteresting big bad. He is, to me, he is just another evil Superman, but he does evil Superman about as well as you could. And by that I mean that if you're going to write a character like this is probably the best way you can write them without just writing them as Omni-Man again. And honestly, I do like Omni-Man better just because he has a few more character details that I enjoy more, and that's something that I don't feel like we get with a lot of the other Viltrumites in the show. A lot of the other Viltrumites are just kind of evil supermen who are out to take over the galaxy. And here we get one who really relishes in just being that character, and it's nothing too complicated, and it works for the episode as about as well as it needs to. And Mark, in this episode, he really works with this character. The writing between the two of them really works for the story of the episode, and honestly, this episode, it wouldn't have worked well for me if it were just another episode in the season, but as a finale to the season, it really does work for me. The villain here works for the finale. Again, I wouldn't have wanted to see him earlier in the season, which I know some people out there have been waiting for. They've been waiting to see the Viltrumites come back, but I was fine waiting up till this point to see the Viltrumites return. And the way they have the Viltrumites return in this episode was also quite interesting. Like I said earlier, they are built up as the dreaded threat, and then when they eventually come, they are proved to be why they're so dreaded. I feel like last season with Anissa, I think it was, we got proof of why Mark should fear the Viltrumites, and here we got just even more proof of that. And honestly, the best part of this episode has to be Mark seeing what this Viltrumite is, why he's like this, and then trying to do his best to just be the hero. And a lot of people in the Invincible fanbase equate Mark to, they equate Omni-Man to being like evil Superman. Even I've said it a few times already, but still, whilst that is true, that most of the Viltrumite characters are evil Superman, I still see Mark as just Superman, and I really believe that for the majority of the show up till this point, that has been just who Mark is. But over the course of this episode, you really see Mark begin to change a little, where he moves away from that whole Superman idea that a lot of people have been talking about, and that I've been talking about so far, to really become his own thing. And just like, when you're writing a character like this, like a superhero character who have these sort of powers and everything, they're always going to be equated to Superman. But in this episode, I really feel like we get enough time with Mark to actually see that he's not just this like superhero character. He is his own character, and it's just really well written. And honestly, this finale to the season was pretty enjoyable. There were a few moments where I thought that the fight scenes were going on a little too long. I also did think that it was kind of strange not seeing a lot of the characters from the previous episode do much to help in this one, but I also understand that this conflict was more Mark focused, it's more Viltrumite focused, and that it wouldn't have worked well if the other characters from the previous episode were chiming in to help Mark. So that's something I understand. Also, a lot of the fight scenes in this episode were pretty brutal. I mean, we got a lot of brutal stuff in the last episode, but here I feel like they really took it up a notch, and it almost matched what we got in the end of season 1. In fact, there were a few moments in this episode where they really felt like the creators were trying to just do what they did with season 1 again, and it kind of works, it kind of doesn't work. It depends on either who you are just when you're watching this. I feel like a lot of audiences are going to react to a lot of the fight scene in this episode just really quite differently. So yeah, that's something that I found really interesting and really entertaining. And of course, we got, because it is the finale, we got more of various different characters come into this episode. And honestly, I feel like most of the characters that the show has been putting really quite front and center all got a moment to really shine and develop further. In fact, over the course of this season, I've really enjoyed seeing my favourite characters would probably have to be Mark, Debbie, Eve, and Rex. I feel like they were the characters who got the most development. And in this episode, they get more of a chance to shine, which I found really quite nice. Just because it was the finale, and I felt like every character should have more time to just finish off their arcs for the season. The one character who I think didn't get enough time, however, to properly finish off his character arc would have to be Oliver. I mean, Oliver's been built up over the season quite drastically. The whole question of him wanting to be more like Omni-Man, and him going too far with just how he approaches fights and everything. I feel like that came to a point 2 episodes ago. I don't feel like there was enough to that in this episode, or even really the last episode. Honestly, that was something that I found kind of disappointing, but again, with the way that we have this villain come in, I don't think there was any real way that the writers and creators could actually push more on that character arc without decreasing the threat from the main villain of this episode. But whilst I do understand that, I do think it was something that took away from Oliver's character. So that's something I hope we get to see in the next season. And beyond that, however, I feel like seeing Oliver really be in this episode and do the types of thing that he does was entertaining and also interesting. Of course, he is Mark's brother, and Mark's going to want to protect him, just as every brother is, but of course, there are times in this episode where it just comes to a point that Oliver has to realise eventually that he can't quite get into these situations yet. And honestly, him not seeing that is probably one of the small nitpicks I have of the episode, because it's just something where I know he wants to be with Mark, he wants to fight with Mark, he wants to try and protect him, but him not recognising the danger of the threat is something that I feel does take the episode down just a little. And honestly, when he gets into a really rough spot with the villain, I would have thought that Mark would really take that as the big power-up moment. But of course that comes a little later with other characters, Eve mainly, but again, that was just probably something I'm nitpicking with. For the majority of this episode is just really entertaining and really interesting. The fight scenes are really well put together, and the choreography for these fights is something that I've really enjoyed. Of course, sometimes they do take the choreography a bit too far for me. They try to increase the destructiveness of the fights and really try and expand the devastation across much of the world, which sometimes goes a bit too far for me. It feels like they're trying to relive season 1, but again, that's not something that's too much of a problem. In the end, we really do get the type of fight that you'd think would be necessary for the characters involved, and honestly, that is just that was really well done. So yeah. Also, towards the end of this episode, once the fight is done and the dust is settled, we do get those last moments with the characters that I really enjoyed. And honestly, the main two characters that I want to just talk about briefly before we move on have to be Mark and Eve. And their whole relationship and everything else, just as it's built up over the season, is something that I've enjoyed on and off again. It's just the way that it's written sometimes feels a little flat, but here I feel like we do get a good few moments with these characters, and I do understand why they do work well together. So that was something that I enjoyed. And honestly, with all of that out the way, that was Season 3 of Invincible. And that was Season 3 of Invincible for me. Honestly, it was a roller coaster of a season. It had some great highs and some unfortunate lows for me. Nothing too devastating though, however. These problems for me were just kind of nitpicky in some instances. Honestly, I've actually enjoyed this season quite a bit. I'm not going to come out and say that I hated the season or that I thought it was bad. No, I don't believe that, because that's just not how I feel. I actually quite enjoyed this season, and I thought it was, in fact, probably better than the second season, but not quite to the same level as Season 1. I feel like Season 1 of this show is still the best, but this is probably better than Season 2. And honestly, aside from the main villain problem that I've talked about, I feel like this show is doing a lot that's really quite interesting, and I'm still rather looking forward to seeing what comes next in Season 4. And honestly, with what I've said about every episode this season, I really feel like this show is doing quite a lot that's really entertaining and interesting. Not just from a story perspective, but also from an animation perspective as well, and from an industry perspective. And what I mean by that is, I saw recently that the creator said something about having the show aim to release a season every February, which, if true, would be something that's either going to work to the show's benefit or its detriment to me. And honestly, I would be fine with them just taking a little longer for Season 4 and really having enough time and budget to really increase the quality. And because this season was good, but if they have more time and more of a budget for the next season, I feel like we might get something that is just as good as Season 1, or maybe better. Because of course, there were more great episodes in this season than there were episodes that didn't work for me, personally. But still, I was able to realise where those few low points in the season were for me. And I feel like these low points that I'm talking about are easily resolved with just a little bit more time to develop the story. And honestly, I feel like it's something that the creators of the show can do, and it's something that I'd look forward to. I'm just not sure if we do get the next season in February if they're going to have enough time to do that. But anyway, as I was saying, Season 3, was it worth the wait? And for me, yes. Yes, it was. As much as I have had my own issues with this season, I will say that for the majority of this season, the show has been really quite entertaining and interesting. And honestly, I look forward to seeing where the story goes with the Viltrum Empire, with Mark and Eve, and Oliver, Debbie. I look forward to seeing where all of the show expands into, and just where the stories go in the future. And now, having said that, I'm going to ask everybody else who's watched this video up till this point what you thought of this season, whether or not you thought it was good, you thought it was bad, and honestly, let me know in the comments. And honestly, let me know whilst you're down there whether or not you're looking forward to Season 4. Did this season leave you wanting more? And did you think it was a good adaptation of the books? So, with all of that said, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please, just remember that these are all my opinions. You don't have to actually care about what I say. I'm just giving you what I think of this season. So, anyway, with all of that said, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.